Welcome to Inquiring Minds. My name is Doug and I'm back with another Pen Resurrection Sunday video. Today's found pen back from the dead is this 1935 Parker Vacumatic Lockdown filler in silver pearl celluloid. Parker made this first generation of the Vacumatic, denoted by a filler plunger that is locked in the down position with a twist after filling, from 1933 to 1938 when they changed the design to what they called the speedline filler. For those 6 years, Parker only made the striated colors in burgundy, emerald, and silver pearl. With this silver pearl, my lockdown collection is complete for the pearl celluloid finishes, as I have a 1935 burgundy pearl and a 1938 emerald pearl. To round out the pearl celluloid Vacumatic collection, I'll have to find a speedline filler in both azure blue pearl and golden pearl. The search goes on. I'm also really lucky to have all three of my lockdown Vacumatics have the rare two-toned Aero Gold nibs. Join me and I'll show you how I brought this 88-year-old Parker Vacumatic back to life right now. And what we have today here on the slab for resurrection is a 1935 Parker Vacumatic in silver pearl. It's a double jewel. It is a lockdown filler, and it's in pretty good shape. Spent a bit of money on this on eBay. It is not restored. You can see the nib is tarnished, but it looks like it's in good shape. The ebonite feed. And what I like about it is this is one with the section is the same striped stacked celluloid, as are the end finials, jewels. Considering this is a 1935. It makes this pen 88 years old, and it has a very fine imprint that has a 45 sort of sideways. I've never seen them sideways like this before. But the 4 is the 4th quarter, and the 5 is of 1935, because they didn't make this particular lockdown filler for more than just a couple of years. The transparency on this pen is exquisite. You can even see that there's a bit of a sack in there, so it must have been replaced, but I'll get that out. But wow, what a great transparency. A very long breather tube, and that lockdown doesn't travel very far. It's very interesting, because my other lockdown, it travels all the way up like that. But I'm going to try to take this pen apart, get that section out of there, and knock that feed and nib out, polish up that nib, and see whether we can restore this pen and get it writing again. So I put my Parker Vac extractor from the inky nib on the end of the pen and added some heat from my heat gun. This is celluloid, so it melts very easily and distorts very easily, so you have to do it very, very carefully. And I got it to budge. So I'm going to take it the rest of the way out, and we'll see what we can see. Ah, the sack came right out. And that looks like it's not the right size sack for that pen. Get this off of here. There's that lockdown filler. Doesn't seem to want to come out. Well, I'm going to be replacing this sack anyway, so let's peel it off. There's no glue on it. It's just pressure fit. Yeah, it seems to be jammed in there. I'm going to pull this sack out of here. That's misshapen as well. I'm going to have to get that pellet out of there. I'll drill that out. And I'm going to work on this little lockdown and see whether I can rescue it. So I was able to drill that pellet out of there with my Dremel tool. And I dug it out with my dental pick. This was misshapen, so I sort of crimped it a little bit back into round shape. And that lockdown slot was indeed pretty narrow, so I'm going to clean this up and make sure that channel works. So just to be clear, that rust is not from that tube at all. It's from the spring inside, because that tube is aluminum. Now I think I'll just put the whole thing in the ultrasonic, and there it is after the ultrasonic bath. Shined up very nicely, and I've gotten the lockdown to work properly. I'm going to add a little silicone oil to these threads and put it back in the pen just to try it out. I don't have to put it all the way in. Let's just give that a try. That's coming all the way out now. And does it lock? That is the question. Not wanting to turn. Well, more work. So I've opened up that channel a little bit with a small screwdriver. But the issue is that it's going all the way down. It's not reaching that turn-off point until this is all the way down here. And there's no way to turn it to get it in there. It has to go all the way down there. And you're not getting enough purchase on that to turn it. So I think I'm going to shorten that little angle where that blade goes in on both sides to give it a little more distance so that you have maybe it goes into there before it turns. So I've widened that gap to lock it down so that it locks down with a little bit of the stem protruding, but it doesn't actually work in the barrel unless the sack is attached to it because it holds this collar in place. So I'm going to take the section off at this point and try to get at that nib. So I'm going to add a little bit of heat to this and we'll try to get that section off. Okay, I added quite a bit of heat, and you add that heat in stages. Heat it a little bit and try it, soak it, heat it a little bit and try it, soak it in increments. If you reach the temperature of melting celluloid, you're in trouble. But I got it to budge, and we'll take it the rest of the way off. You see there's still quite a bit of dried ink, and there was shellac. Yeah, so that's what needed to be broken there. There was a bit of shellac on there. So that breather tube, yep, comes right out. And then I'll soak this for quite a bit to get all that dried ink out of there. And then we can try to knock that feed out of that section. Then we'll get a good look at that nib. So now while that nib is soaking, I'm going to try to get that jewel and clip off of there. Put a card under the clip so it won't scratch the cap anymore. And a pencil up underneath so I can push. I'll push and turn the cap at the same time. And there we go. These celluloid jewels back before 1938 were all one piece. And then we can get at that brass nut. And trying to find the right slot screwdriver. You can find the right width, but that gap there is so thin. I took a bit and ground it down so that it's the right thickness to get at that brass nut without chewing it up. So we put that in the slot and we give it a turn. It's brass. We have to be careful not to chew it up. And there's the nut. And there's the clip. So that's going to go into a bath, and then I'll polish it up with some metal polish and a buffing cloth. And we'll clean that up with some metal polish as well. And we put all of our parts into a little plastic cup so we don't lose all the small bits. And then I can clean up that cap. Get all those scratches out of there with some micro mesh. Now I've turned out the lights and put an LED lamp inside the barrel so you can see that transparency. Isn't that amazing? And now I'm just going to scrape off some of that excess shellac that's on there with an X-Acto blade. And here is the nib, freshly knocked out. So we'll polish that up. And there's the section. And there's the feed. Put that through the ultrasonic bath and polish it up. And let's see how shiny we can get that nib. So there's the underside all polished up. There we go. Beautiful. So I've taken off the end finial jewel and put the section back on and the blind cap back on the pen so I can do some polishing. So I decided against going micro mesh and decided just to try my polishing compound because I couldn't find any major nicks or scratches on this pen. I didn't want to risk losing that imprint. So I think I'll put this pen back together again. So everything's now polished up. I polished up the clip. Very, very shiny indeed, as is the top jewel and the bottom jewel, which I removed and cleaned that silver ring, reinstalled. Let's put the clip back on the cap. My specially ground driver into those slots. Just loosely tighten it for now and position the clip so that the clip is between the two breather holes. And tighten it down just snug. Top jewel back in for matte. Bit of pressure on it with a pencil. And that should be tight. Very tight. Polished up the feed. and cleaned out that breather tube, made sure that hole in there is clear. There's a hole right there. Make sure that's all clear. You blow through it, both ends, and we'll put the nib back in the section. So we'll place the nib and the feed together so that they're aligned. I put the section into the barrel to give it more leverage here. I'll spin it around until I can find the easiest place to put it in. It sort of lines up by itself because that's where it's been for 88 years, and give it a push. That seems to be the perfect location for it. You can still see the 35 mark under Parker. Now it's time to put the diaphragm on the filler and see whether I can get this pen to fill and write. I think I know now why that was sort of oval before. I sort of squeezed it into round to get that pellet out, but it has widened over the years, so probably subsequent sacks have gone in there numerous times, and that hole is too large for the pellet now. So I think I'm going to push it in and then clamp it down. That's what she said. Maybe that little crimp, just slightly, keep that pellet from falling out. That seems to work. So this is my pellet pusher version 2, improved version from the Inky nib, and there's a line right there to where you cut the sack, and then you can feel where that little line is. There we go. Now we'll dredge this in some talc. Put our pellet pusher back in, right up against that pellet, and then fold it back on itself. Well, that took quite some time. Some of them are easier than others. I don't know why, but I think that's going to work. So I'm going to put some silicone oil on those threads and just a little bit around the edge of that cuff so that it slides into the barrel without twisting. Protect the nib while I'm doing that. Get out my tool, clamp it down, a little rubber mat, and screw it down hand tight. There, I'm going to take the section off. We can inspect it from above to make sure it's not twisted, and it is working. Actually, I put some silicone grease on those threads to prevent any leaking, and I don't need any shellac on that section to make it difficult to repair in the future if necessary. That's working. See whether the lock is working, and the lock is working. There you go. So that extra little bit that I shaved off of that filler on both sides with my Dremel tool has allowed it to actually lock and unlock. It's working perfectly. Blind cap on and recap the pen, and we're ready for ink. Before I fill the pen, I thought I'd dip test it, see whether I need to work on it, because it's easier to knock the nib out again if necessary when the pen is empty. And I'd say this is a medium. So let's fill it up. Listen for bubbles. Just keep pumping it until you don't hear bubbles. And we see ink sloshing around. That's almost totally full at this point. Turn it up and push it slowly, and it locks. And there we go. And here's the pen after restoration. In 1935, a Parker Vacumatic standard like this one cost $7.50. In today's dollars, that's $168.50 US. Most of the world was in a deep economic depression, so almost $170 for a pen would be considered an extravagance. Regardless of the price, by 1935, the Parker Vacumatic had reinstated the Parker Pen Company as the #1 pen manufacturer in the United States. 88 years ago, this was not only a technological innovation in writing instruments, it was also a work of stylish modern art. The Art Deco styling of the Joseph Platt design clip, the beautiful pearlescent banded cap and body, and the transparent barrel that allows writers to see their ink level in a pen that held a whopping 2.3 milliliters of ink made this pen a remarkable achievement in the middle of the greatest economic downturn the modern world had ever seen. This is an amazing achievement for a company to have even once in a company's lifetime. But Parker had made a huge mark in writing instruments with the Parker Duofold just 14 years earlier in 1921. And they would make arguably the most popular and greatest fountain pen innovation with the Parker 51 just 6 years later. They would keep on making innovations in fountain pen design with the capillary filler, Parker 61, the pen that fills itself in 1956, and the Parker 45 cartridge fountain pen in 1960. I might be a little biased being completely down the Vacumatic rabbit hole, but I think the Parker Vacumatic made from 1933 to 1948 was Parker's finest pen and their greatest era. One of the reasons I think that is how amazingly well-built, comfortable, and beautiful these fountain pens are even in 2023. I've tried to restore other vintage pens even younger than this Vacumatic, and some have either imploded while writing with them or crumble into dust in my hands. Some vintage pens are like fragile relics of a bygone era and have to be held with white gloves and kept hermetically sealed in glass cases for display. But these 1930s Parker Vacumatics were built like celluloid tanks, and they are tanks, ink tanks. They hold a huge amount of ink. This big modern Leonardo piston filler holds 1.5 milliliters of ink compared to this relatively small 88-year-old Vacumatic's 2.3 milliliter ink capacity. So let's take a look at the features of this ink tank. Overall, it is about 5 inches long capped, and here it is with a Pilot Metropolitan for scale. The cap, section, barrel, blind cap, and end jewels are made of a special celluloid that Parker commissioned from the DuPont Corporation. These early Vacumatics were made from rod stock and features alternating bands of black and pearlescent celluloid. Later Vacs were made from flat stock that was wrapped around a mandrel. The barrel alternates pearlescent with transparent bands, giving a clear view of the ink levels, and the cap, section, jewels, and blind cap are all opaque. From the top, we see the striped celluloid jewel that screws down into the brass nut that holds the nickel-plated Joseph Platt designed Art Deco arrow clip that eventually became the company's logo that even stands today. These cap jewels varied quite a bit. Here are my two other lockdowns in burgundy and emerald, and you can see how much larger the silver one is than the other two. The burgundy is from 1935 and the emerald is from 1938. The cap has 3 bands, which generally denotes a top-of-the-line Vacumatic, as the bottom-of-the-line Vacs mostly had 2 cap bands. The barrel is straight to the blind cap, which tapers down slightly to the end finial adorned with a celluloid end jewel surrounded by a nickel-plated ring. And the blind cap unscrews to get at the lockdown pump rod to fill the pen. In 1937-38, they redesigned this by removing the lockdown feature and just allowing the aluminum rod to stay extended. This was called a speedline filler, and that required the lengthening of the blind cap to accommodate the longer rod. The speedline filler was the second generation of the Vacumatic and replaced in 1942 with a celluloid rod called the wartime or post-war filler because Parker was limiting their use of aluminum and brass because of the war effort. The imprint on the barrel reads G.O.S. Parker, Parker Vacumatic, made in USA, and there's a date code, which on this pen is turned 90 degrees, which I find interesting, and it says 4/5, which is the fourth quarter of 1935. The cap unscrews with 1.5 turns to reveal a concave section of the same pearlescent celluloid as the cap, and a 2-toned 14-karat gold and platinum nib and ebonite feed. Let's get a closer look at this nib. This is the classic golden arrow nib with the arrow running down the center of the nib in gold, surrounded by the platinum-plated gold. And it says USA Parker and 35, which is the date code for the third quarter of 1935. It isn't unusual for nib dates and barrel dates to be from different quarters or even different years. The cap posts deeply and securely, and the pen is exquisitely well balanced, posted, especially when you grip the pen further back on the thicker barrel, as I do. Unposted, the pen is plenty long enough to write with comfortably, but I post this pen as I like the length and the overall lightness of the entire pen, as it weighs only 19 grams capped and full of ink. Now let's look at some size comparisons. And here is the 1935 Parker Vacumatic Lockdown in silver pearl, with a 1935 Parker Vacumatic Lockdown in burgundy pearl, a 1938 Parker Vacumatic Lockdown in Emerald Pearl, a third generation Parker Vacumatic from 1945, post-war filler in azure blue pearl with the blue diamond split arrow clip, and a 1947 Parker 51 Demi with a gold-filled cap in cordovan brown. You can see the evolution of the arrow clip design from 1935 through 1947 in these examples. Around 1937, Parker redesigned the clip on the Vacumatic and created the split arrow clip that had the name Parker vertically down the center of the arrow split. There were several variations on the split arrow clip, like this one on the 1945 Parker Vacumatic, third generation. This one has the blue diamond in the split. There was one with a star, and there was one without either a star or the blue diamond. The star and the blue diamond in the split arrow clip indicates the lifetime warranty. The split arrow clip was also applied to the Parker 51 Vacumatic until Parker discontinued the Vacumatic filler in 1948. The new aerometric filler Parker 51 replaced the Vacumatic and sported an arrow clip that was a longer plat-styled arrow clip like this one. So this is clearly a transition year where they're using the new clip with the older Vacumatic filler. Now let's look at them posted. And here they are posted, and you can see some more transitions happening. This is a third or fourth quarter 1935, whereas this is a second quarter 1935. They share the same kind of section being the celluloid. The cap doesn't post as well as on the later. So this is the oldest one here. And this is the next oldest. And then it goes down to this one, and then this one, and then this one. But you can see from the second quarter to the fourth quarter, this cap fits a little bit better when posted than this one does. It doesn't fit very well at all on this one. Then we move down to 1938. It posts even better, but you can see that the section is now ebonite. The same arrow, two-tone nib, different shapes. And then you come down to the 1948. The cap band is different, and the pen posts a lot better than the previous generations. And of course, the major change to the Parker 51. Now let's look at them unposted. And here they are unposted. Of course, the Demi is very much shorter than other standard size Parkers, almost too short to write with unposted. Now let's look at some measurements, and I'll be back with a writing sample. And we're back with the writing portion of the review. This is Clairefontaine 90 GSM paper, and this is the 1935 Parker Vacumatic in silver pearl, and it has a 14 karat gold. I'm going to call it a medium nib. And it's very smooth. Let's check the wetness. And it's very wet indeed. It's a good amount of feedback. Feedback can be considered drag on the page or friction, but not scratchy. Very, very pleasant. And the ink is, of course, Waterman's Serenity Blue. It's safe for latex sac pens. People often say that it's safe because of the pH level. It has more to do with, as I understand it, with the saturation of the ink. As the line variation, it has some vintage bounce to it. It's not a flex nib, but it has some really nice bounce right there. So it makes it a very pleasant writing experience. And this nib makes a 0.5 millimeter line, which is a Western fine or a Japanese fine to medium. It feels more like a medium to me anyway when it writes. It's so wet. So I'm going to call it a medium regardless of its measurement. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And for our quote. And some reverse writing. It's a bit scratchier, a lot thinner, but it keeps up fairly nicely. So if I wanted to sketch with this pen, I'd probably smooth that out a little bit. They actually advertised that these nibs were capable of writing right side up and upside down for different line widths and some quick writing. No issues whatsoever. Nicely wet pen. So what are my thoughts on this Resurrection? Well, I paid a substantial price for this pen unrestored. So I'm thrilled I was able to bring it back to life, because if I had driven a stake into its heart, I would have been inconsolable.
Inconsolable.
As it is, the pen is not only shiny and gorgeous, it writes like a dream. Not only does it write beautifully, but it expands my set of lockdowns, now in burgundy, emerald, and silver. The only one remaining is the golden pearl, which only existed for a couple of years in the lockdown first generation. Unfortunately, there's no such thing as an azure blue pearl lockdown, as the color was only introduced in 1941 in a Speedline second generation version. Oh, how incredibly expensive are these rabbit holes that consume us.
Mine! All mine! Get back in there! Down, down, down! Go, go, go! Mine, mine, mine!
And there you have it. This might be the last Pen Resurrection Sunday for several weeks, as I have a backlog of new pens to review in time for the lucrative gift-giving season. For the next several weeks, I'll be doing new pen reviews on Saturdays and Sundays, and even cramming in a few on some Wednesdays. So don't forget to like and subscribe and ring that bell to get instant notifications whenever a new video is posted. And you can join as a member of my channel for only 99 cents a month, and I guarantee I'll answer your comments in the comment section, and you'll get cool emojis, badges, and sneak peek unboxing videos as well. And that just leaves it for me to say, thank you. For watching. And that's all she wrote.
I made this.